So last week I watched Parasite, and this is such a good movie. I feel like the word that always comes to mind when describing Parasite, for me, is perfect. Everything is so well done. Characters, humor, cinematography, symbolism, self-awareness. I feel like it's impossible to be bored watching a movie like this if you're a film fan, so welcome to Classic Explained, episode 18, Parasite. To break this movie down, we're going to use 3 themes. 1, division of class, where we'll discuss the visual symbolism of class, the Park family's ignorance, the smell of the poor, the Park parents' sex scene, and the title of the film. 2, selfishness by circumstance, where we'll discuss the Kim family's manipulation, the Kim family's justification, the Park family's socioeconomic dominance, the feud in the basement, and the differing values of love. And 3, fragility of hope, where we'll discuss the idea of a plan, the meaning of the stone gift, the finale with the stabbings, and the meaning of the ending of the film, and much more. And if you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. It helps so much. And if you want to see more of these, please make sure to subscribe as well. Let's get started. Theme number 1, division of class. Very easily, after the initial viewing of this movie, you can clearly see that this film is centered around the theme of social class. And this movie likes to take a very honest and visual approach to displaying the distance between upper and lower socioeconomic classes. We have 2 opposite families who visually mirror each other, with a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter. We have the Parks, the upper class family in this film, and we have the Kims, the lower class family in this film. And in the 2 moments before we meet each of these families, we get a visual indication of where they stand socioeconomically. We can see visually that it takes a steep hill of a street and a series of beautiful staircases to get all the way up to the high-income Park family residence. And we also see visually that we need to move below ground before we meet the low-income Kim family residence. There's also a difference in the distance within the families themselves. In many of the scenes and individual shots, the Kims are seen all together, sharing food, sharing experiences, and firing jokes back and forth. And when it comes to the Parks, they are almost always separated from one another in their house. The film also likes to highlight the ignorance of the Park family and upper class culture in many ways. It's almost satirical. It kind of reminds me of the supporting characters in American Psycho in a way. The son, Song, is wrapped up in his indigenous themed costumes and arrows and enjoys living in the tent outside. And rather than identifying this as a phase and a literally childish point of view on indigenous culture, his mother, Kyo, believes this is promising for a boy who is artistically gifted and interested in culture and history. She thinks Song's paintings indicate that he could be some kind of prodigy. And this demonstration of her ignorance becomes the entry point for the Kims to take advantage of the Parks. The Parks also look down on the poor and lower classes. The father, Dong-ik, actually describes that they have a particular smell, specifying that the father of the Kims, Ki-tae, carries this smell into their car. The idea of the smell is connected with this idea surrounded around the poor. It's this aura, like they should be avoided, like they're dangerous or simply no longer useful, like they're unworthy of being around. And it's the wealthy who seem to notice this smell the most. In this same scene, Dong-ik also fetishizes the idea of wearing cheaper underwear. The cheaper underwear, which actually belongs to the daughter of the Kims, Ki-jung, is part of Dong-ik's sexual fantasy because he sees it as taboo. Sleeping with a woman with clothes of that quality is wrong to him. So he sees this lower class woman roleplay with his wife as very sexually exciting. And what I love about this film so much is this film is not just bashing the rich. This film wasn't just created to say the rich are bad and the poor are good. The movie is way too honest and complex and mature just to do that. The Kims are actually very manipulative and dangerous and scheming in many ways. The film certainly has multiple meanings from the title, Parasite, which I will surely touch on again later in this video, but one of those meanings is the Kim family. Like a parasite, the Kims are leeching the Wi-Fi out of other homes and fraudulently submitting documents. And like parasites do, one by one, every single one of the Kims slowly invades the Park's home by manipulating the Parks in a series of harmful and dangerous ways. However, it would be irrational for me to blame the Kims entirely for their decisions. It's not all within their control, which brings me to theme number 2, selfishness by circumstance. If you just tuned in to this movie somewhere in the first half for a few minutes, the Kims would look like the most awful people. Just stealing money, stealing jobs, and putting innocent people in danger. But when you watch this movie in full, it's very clear that there is way more nuance to it. The Kim family does harm others and steal from others to benefit themselves, but it's circumstance that allows them to justify their actions. When Ki-woo is leaving the house for an interview with this fake certificate, he says, "I don't think of this as forgery or crime. I'll go to this university next year. I just printed out the document a bit early." Ki-woo would likely do very well in a university, but he can't afford to go to school at this point in his life, so he's able to justify why he's created this fake certificate. Overall, the Kims can justify their manipulative actions with their own suffering. But the Kims, of course, are not the only parasites. The Parks are also parasites in their own way because they benefit greatly from the hard work of the less fortunate. The convenience of the lives of the Park family is largely built on the suffering and dismissal of families like the Kims. Therefore, when the Kims begin their schemes to steal from the Parks, they feel like it's okay. The Parks have been harmfully stealing from people like the Kims their entire lives. The Kims seem so much worse because the harm is done with close proximity. The Parks cause harm with great distance, which makes the Parks seem kind, generous, and harmless. This is why when Ki-tae says Yeo-jeong Cho is rich but nice, Chung-suk says, "Not rich but still nice. Nice because she's rich." Hell, if I had all this money, I'd be nice too. It's convenience and distance that makes the Park seem so virtuous. The Kims can rarely even help others in their own community because there's always another issue that greatly threatens their well-being and even their lives. And when the Kims meet Moon-gwang's husband, Jun-se, secretly living below the Park residence, it's inevitable for there to be war between the two groups. Both groups either work together and make themselves extremely vulnerable to each other, or they try to eliminate the other to ensure the safety of their own family. And this conflict is symbolic of how crime is driven in disenfranchised communities. While the rich revel and bask in their excess, the poor fight each other over whatever is left. But as I've mentioned before, both of these families are way more closely connected as families than the Parks. They have to be. Even living alone, completely isolated from society, Jun-se says, "Even in my old age, love will comfort me." In contrast, Ki-tae asks Dong-ik if he still loves his wife. Dong-ik laughs and says, "Of course, I love her. We'll call it love." For the rich, all the excess can become so consuming that it's normal for love to be secondary. For the poor, love is the only thing there is. Theme number 3, fragility of hope. This movie is filled with symbols of hope, but they're all very fragile symbols of hope. There are symbols of hope that aren't very promising, like the song's paintings. And there are symbols of hope that were maybe very promising at a time for a way out, but never completely succeeded, like Chung-suk's hammer throw medals. I just feel like there's so much hope in this movie, but it never gets rewarded. The saddest aspect of this movie to me is that hope always seems to shatter right in front of our main characters. Ki-tae always describes to his family that he has a plan, and he greatly values having a plan in general. When Ki-woo is leaving for his interview, Ki-tae is excited and proud because Ki-woo has a plan. When Ki-tae sees Jun-se locked underground, he is shocked that Jun-se is living without a plan. And even at the most desperate of times, Ki-tae always has a plan for his family to follow. However, the moment where Ki-tae loses all hope and hits rock bottom is when his house is completely flooded. When Ki-tae and his kids are at the shelter, he says, "Ki-woo, you know what kind of plan never fails? No plan at all. No plan. You know why? If you make a plan, life never works out that way. With no plan, nothing can go wrong." Ki-tae has done a philosophical 180, taking on the most cynical point of view on his life. He's lost all hope in the possibility of a brighter future. However, Ki-woo doesn't seem to take his father's advice at this moment, and he oddly mentions that the Scholar Stone keeps clinging to him. And this, of course, brings me to the meaning of the Scholar Stone. These landscape rocks are made of rare minerals and have been collected in Korean culture for thousands of years. They would often sit on the desks of scholars, which gave them the name Scholar Stone. They are also often believed to bring great wealth to families, as mentioned in this film. But what I find very important is that the 4 family members all have differing reactions to receiving the stone. Ki-tae is interested and appreciative, Ki-jung is mainly indifferent, and Chung-suk says she would have been happier if it were food. However, Ki-woo is the most interested and becomes emotionally attached to the stone, almost to the point where it seems like the stone is mystically attached to him, hence why he says it keeps clinging to him. And most notably, during the flood, the heavy stone floats to the surface of the water when Ki-woo approaches it. So to me, the stone represents a unique form of hope. A form of hope that only Ki-woo seems to have. It's this form of hope that is not fragile. A form of hope that is so resilient, it won't crack in the most dire of circumstances. And regardless of its weight, it can help someone rise out of whatever trouble is trying to submerge them. And ironically enough, this movie pokes fun at the idea of symbolism in film by having Ki-woo say the same line 3 times in the film. This is so metaphorical, including when he receives the Scholar Stone. And it's also extremely ironic that the stone is what is used to nearly kill Ki-woo. But I think these satirical ironies are used to communicate to the audience how difficult it is to believe in a dream that is so far away from you. Something like a brighter future is almost impossible to see when you're in a situation like the Kims. It's almost comical to believe such a thing. But Ki-woo's hope stays intact no matter what. I believe, near the end of the film, he visited the basement with the stone to make peace with Moon-gwang and Jun-se. However, when this ironically backfires, as mentioned before, we're introduced to the grand finale of the movie. The climax of this movie ties back to theme number 1 and represents an uprising of the ugly underbelly of society. The darkest and most disregarded side of society is being brought to the surface for the upper class to experience. It's the worst nightmare for those who are sheltered like the Parks. Dong-ik still has no regard for the life of young Ki-jung. His only interest is to retrieve his keys and escape. Dong-ik is disgusted by the smell of Jun-se's body that he has to plug his nose to grab his keys from under him. This, of course, parallels Dong-ik's distaste for the aura around the lower class that he described on the couch with his wife by that particular smell. As a result, Ki-tae can't help but punish Dong-ik for his disregard and disgust for those who are suffering, and Ki-tae kills Dong-ik. And even during the aftermath of this tragic situation, hope seems to be restored in our characters in the Kim family and is more powerful than ever before. Even though Ki-jung has passed away and Ki-tae has locked himself in the basement, he sends a Morse code message every night with only the hope that his son sees it. And when Ki-woo finally does see the message, he makes the pledge to himself that he will work so hard that he will pull him and his mother out of their community and finally reunite with his long-lost father. Even in the most desperate of circumstances, Ki-woo has a plan built out of the most resilient form of hope. Alright, that's my analysis. Subscribe for weekly videos and please send me recommendations. I missed her last week, so I'm surely going to cover her next week. But please, let me know what you thought about Parasite because this movie is fantastic. I would love to hear what you think. I hope to see you again and thank you so much for watching. See you later.